Hello, good people. This is Sister Julia Walsh, and you're listening to Messy Jesus Business. Welcome to the Mess. I'm here with Sister Susan Francois, the assistant leader and treasurer of the Congregation of St. Joseph of Peace. She is currently based in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. Sister Susan is an author and social justice educator and advocate, having previously ministered at the Intercommunity Peace and Justice Center in Seattle, Washington. Sister Susan presently serves on the boards of several nonprofits. Before entering religious life, she worked as a city elections officer in Portland, Oregon. Sister Susan, welcome to Messy Jesus Business.
Thank you, Julia. It's great to be here.
I don't even know how long I've known you.
A long time.
Yeah.
At least like 10, 15 years, I think.
Yeah. Most of the time I've been a sister, we have been friends. We have been colleagues in a way and peers in religious life as we're fairly close in age. You're a bit older than me.
I'm over the 50 mark now. I'm 52 this year, July.
Yeah. So you're my big sister. You and I both are creatives. We're people who like to write, people who love to play around with media. At one point, you had a handle that was the Media Nun. And you've got some public attention when you had a spiritual practice of tweeting Mr. Trump when he was the president.
I did.
You've had quite the story. How did you find your way into religious life, into the Congregation of St. Joseph of Peace, and come to know that you were called to be a sister and advocate for peace and justice and give witness with your life?
So first, I left the church. I grew up Catholic, went to 12 years Catholic school, and my junior, senior year, had a lot of questions and issues with the church, particularly as a woman, and became an ex-Catholic for the next, say, 12 years of my life. Moved from Maryland, which was very religious and Catholic, to Oregon, where at that time, 60% of people were atheist or agnostic. Went to Lewis and Clark College, which was voted in U.S. News and World Report. They do those college rankings.
Oh, yeah.
The number one school where God is not.
What?
It was.
What?
That was a rating. I met people who were atheists who also helped the poor and worked at the food pantry and protested against the Iraq War, which just kind of blew my mind because I always thought that was like a Catholic thing to care about the world. And led my life and became a government worker. I worked for the city of Portland. I was city elections officer for 11 years before I entered the congregation. And it was towards the end of that time that a friend of mine was going to a parish run by the Paulist Fathers in Portland. And the Paulists are, part of their charism is to really reach out to the alienated, to reconcile. We always joked that St. Philip Neri Parish was either your first step into the church or your last step out. And so I had been seeking, I had tried to be a Quaker. I had tried to be a Buddhist, but it turns out I'm Catholic. So I ended up at St. Philip's. And before I knew it, in that parish, I was a 4- and 5-year-old Sunday school teacher. I was on the pastoral council. I was co-chair of the Peace and Justice Commission. I started a chapter of Pax Christi. It was around when the Iraq War was happening. I worked in the food pantry. In my early 30s, had a key to the parish. Like I was the church lady.
I can so see it, actually. Yeah, so amazing. How long did you actually think about being a sister? Were you in spiritual direction, thinking about the call until you then found your congregation?
No, it was pretty quick. So, well, I've been secretly thinking about it and had been like, this was back in the day of blogs. And had been stalking blogs of people in religious life. Actually started my own blog. My first blog was Musings of Discerning Woman. It's still out there.
I remember it.
My entire religious life journey is there in a highly censored form. Once Father Steve connected me with a spiritual director who was this lovely sister of a different congregation who kind of still reminds me of Yoda, very small, very wise. Pretty quickly, I was looking at religious congregations. But Before that, I will say, before he had the conversation with me, when I was secretly looking at things, I remember walking on the beach, because the beach is always a place where God is very present and aware to, like, I'm very open to God on the beach. I remember walking on the Oregon coast and having this overwhelming feeling like that I should be a sister. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And I remember, because I think at that point I was like maybe 30.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to God, I was like, well, maybe when I'm 40, if I haven't met anyone, we'll talk about it, right? And then, I kid you not, I go to the coffee shop in this little town of Manzanita, Oregon, and I'm reading the New York Times, and there's some article about the nun shortage.
Oh.
Like, who knows why? Who knows what it was about? But still, I was like, I don't think so. And then it was 2 years later that Father Steve had that conversation with me.
Huh.
And I made final vows at 38.
Oh.
So 2
Yeah.
years before the negotiated date that I was going to take a infant.
When you were a kid, though, were you pretty religious?
I mean, we were a really Catholic family.
Yeah.
We all went to Catholic school. And Julia, you know that my dad's great aunt was one of the early Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. My dad kind of always had this joke that he wanted me to become a nun, but I was always just like, yeah, I don't think so. And by the time I was in school, there weren't very many sisters around. So like in elementary school, my brothers and sisters had a lot of Sisters of St. Joseph of Philadelphia. I had 2 in the 8 years. And then I went to an all-girls high school for 3 years that was run by the Religious of Jesus and Mary. And Sister Janet Stolba, who was my principal, who was awesome. And many years later in college, I dressed up as her for a Dress as Your Hero Halloween party. Anyway, so I just didn't really have any role models or thoughts that it was something I'd want to do. I always knew I wanted to make the world a better place. I was taught to do that. And I always thought that government would be my path to do that.
Yeah.
And I tried that, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I know you, I still think of you as a person who knows how to use power for good, right?
Oh, yeah.
Government, the church, positions of leadership, whatever position you're in. I'd love to hear you break that open and describe what you discovered while you were working in government about the potential.
I've always been someone who is committed to the common good, and I take that from my parents. My dad was a local government official growing up, and my mom was kind of an unofficial social worker, and then later an actual kind of social worker after she raised us. And so all of my brothers and sisters, I'm the youngest of 5, we all knew that we're supposed to leave the world better than we found it. And my parents also gave us a real awareness of the importance of political structures and of systems, and the way that you combat systems of injustice is to work for justice. So, like, just as a quick example, I grew up in an all-white suburb outside of DC, all white, because when they built it in the 60s, they would not sell to African Americans because the law hadn't changed yet. And it was built on a former place where people were enslaved, both a private plantation and then also a Jesuit plantation where the Jesuit novitiate was for the province of Maryland. And so just the irony there of that. And so growing up, I always heard stories about how my mom used to protest down at the model homes every week for integration and for them to sell the houses to African Americans. And then later on, we didn't have a shopping center in our town. So if you went 20 minutes one direction, there was a very posh white shopping center. And if you went 20 minutes the other direction, it was an African American community, more struggling shopping center. And I was always annoyed that we didn't go to the posh one. She would make us go to that other one. But that's because she knew that our dollars should be spent in the Black community, not in the white community. So I was just kind of raised to look at things with the 2 feet of charity and justice. Like, yes, you need to feed the poor, but then you also need to advocate for systems that don't make people poor. So it's just the way I am. I don't know that I could operate any other way, you know. But working in government, you know, I worked in local government. I was city elections officer. I don't know if I could do elections work now, because back then I would be sued, but I didn't get death threats. The way our democracy is today is kind of dangerous for people who are serving it. I found that work fulfilling, but it wasn't connected to my faith. And so there's something about that integration of my life as a follower of Jesus, as a Catholic Christian, as a believer of Catholic social teaching, and the ability of the gospel to actually have influence on how we as human beings relate to each other and to earth, that gives me an added inspiration. And now as a sister, gives me an added influence. This last week, I was invited to come to the New Jersey Committee on the Environment to support a bill that is looking to divest the state's pension from fossil fuels. And the reason why the advocate community asked me to come was because one of my hats that I wear, I'm on leadership of our congregation, and I am our treasurer. We have divested from fossil fuels. And so to be able to be there as a sister, to not only present the moral argument from Pope Francis about how we have to really address this climate crisis, but also to be able to share the experience of the sisters putting our money where our mouth is in the political sphere. If I weren't a sister, if I weren't the treasurer, I wouldn't have that kind of a voice. I think whatever our calling is, God calls us to bring who we are and what our gifts and our interests are in service of the gospel. So for me, systemic change is part of it.
It sounds like your family of origin was incredibly formative for you in helping you to have a social consciousness, but also claiming this identity of a change maker, of someone who could really affect good in the world. That obviously led you to religious life, which now that identity adds an extra layer of something, like when you're doing the advocacy, there is something about the sister's presence and the power that we have. What are you noticing about that when you're doing this advocacy and when you introduce yourself as sister in different situations and you're advocating for the vulnerable?
I think for many years in this country, the sisters were the doers. We were the ones who started the hospitals, who started the schools, who after Vatican II really moved to the margins, were accompanying the people. And so because of that, our generation, well, I'm a Gen Xer, you're probably a millennial, but our generations have inherited that respect, right? You compound that with what's happened in the church and the abuse of power and the abuse crisis of the hierarchy, and people are looking to women religious as still seeing us as having integrity. There also is that unfortunate trope of, sister with the ruler and being strict. And so some people will say they're afraid of us, but more and more what I hear is that we put our feet where our heart is, our hands where our heart is, Another advocacy role that I have as treasurer is we have stock in major corporations. Our sisters, for the 140 years that we've been in existence as a congregation, have pooled our resources together in our vow of poverty and invested those. And that's really what we use now to take care of our sisters. And we, like many congregations, use that stock to then be in dialogue with corporations for justice. So it's not just advocating with government, but with corporations. So last year we filed a resolution, or 2 years ago, with Microsoft on lobbying alignment. Long story short, they say that they're against selling their facial recognition software to bad actor countries or for racial profiling. And yet they were lobbying for laws to allow them to do that. And so we filed what's called a proposal asking them just to be honest, okay, tell us what you're lobbying on. And we got a lot of shareholder support. And so then Microsoft asked to talk to us in dialogues. And in the end, they did what we asked. What I will tell you is that working with these amazing lay people that do all of this research and the work day to day on shareholder advocacy, they say that when a sister is there, they listen to us differently and they behave better. So whatever the reason why, I want to bring whatever gifts God has given me and whatever privilege circumstance gives for justice. And so if I can be the spokesman, if I can come in and make the lobbyist of Microsoft listen, I'll do it, know. I remember when I was discerning, my vocation director gave me a video to watch of a talk by Timothy Radcliffe, who was the former prior general for the Dominicans. He's English. And he was talking about how the vocational call is to be who you are in service of the gospel, not to be someone different. And he was saying Peter was a fisherman, became a fisher of people. Francis was a troubadour, became a troubadour, a love song singer for God. Ignatius was a soldier for God. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh no, God's going to want me to be a bureaucrat for God because I had been in government, which is true because I got elected to leadership 3 years after final vows. But I also think this worker for social justice and systemic change in the context of faith is just how I make more sense.
Yeah.
And I'm able to make more of a difference than I probably ever would have just on my own.
So as a member of your congregation and the larger movement of religious life in the church, you're part of this collective power. I mean, we both are, right? And when we sign a petition, for some reason, it seems to be more impactful than the ordinary person. There's such a strangeness to it. And I know that I cringe sometimes, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, yes, let me offer it, right?
I think there's a way for us to do it in the spirit of our vows. So it's in obedience to the call.
Yeah.
It's in the spirit of poverty because we don't want to be special sister. We have to kind of like put ourselves out there. And it's in the spirit of chastity because it's for that all-inclusive love. Yeah. So I think if it becomes about you, then that doesn't work. But I mean, anyone who watched Dead Man Walking, which I saw on the opera stage at the Metropolitan Opera last year. And what was fascinating about having watched the story of Helen Prejean in the movie, obviously with Susan Sarandon, which was amazing, but watching it as an opera, I got the sense of she was only able to do it because of her sisters. That yes, she was the one on death row with the killer, the convicted person who was going to be killed. But she would come home and there's this beautiful duet with like one of her sisters in her house. And when she was first thinking about doing that ministry, her sisters were like asking her all these questions, like, is that really a good idea? Should you really do that? Will you be safe? And those moments when she's there all by herself on death row with the person who's facing death, you just get the sense that all of her sisters are there with her. And so I think that's part of what it is too. You know, my community's charism, our founding mission is to promote peace through justice. It's been that way from the very beginning. And at our first profession of vows, the bishop who co-founded us said that the object of our institute is to secure peace in the midst of the restless turmoil and anxious anxiety of the modern world. That was 140 years ago. So we're in this tradition. And so we just take our turn doing it. And then the Spirit does what the Spirit does, you know. But I think for us to have the humility to take that role of sister and to use it for the good.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's a real encouragement to me because I sometimes still reluctant to claim it fully. Yet it's absolutely true that I wouldn't be who I am and be doing any of the things I am without my sisters. And it's not just about the structural support, but it's really about like when I entered religious life, I was just journaling and then casually started to share like, oh, sister, I wrote a poem. You want to hear it? You know, and then, oh, Julia, you know, maybe you should learn how to write for real. And like, it just all unfolded. And oh my goodness, now I have a book out in the world, you know, like that's not something that I never would have even considered trying such a thing.
Yeah. And for us, this is the community. But I think all people find their community. Maybe it's their spouse and their marriage. Maybe it's their family. Maybe it's their parish community. I mean, on my journey, as I shared earlier, I don't think it's a coincidence that I found my path to being a peace and justice advocate in the church when I was in a parish community that inspired me and that surrounded me with that and gave me those opportunities. And then that led me to this religious congregation, which is definitely my home and my place. But I recently have realized that I'm a writer, and I don't know that I would have realized that if I weren't a sister. And our founder, Margaret Anna Cusack, was a writer. And one of our initial purposes in our first constitutions was to publish good books. And so on our 135th anniversary, 5 years ago, we started a small press, Kenmare Press. And in the year of St. Joseph, I published a book of reflections on St. Joseph through there. And right now I'm theoretically writing a murder mystery about a millennial nun.
Love it.
Who's the amateur sleuth, but I don't know. My time to write and my creativity never match.
Yeah.
Because fiction is different. I'm normally a spiritual and a justice writer. So fiction is different.
Yeah.
Those are just gifts that religious life has given me. So I think everyone needs to find their home.
Yeah. What is home for you? How did you know that you were at home with those sisters?
I mentioned my spiritual director, the first one I had. She was in a different congregation and they were in Portland. So I looked at them for a long time and they were good and they are great women and they have a strong charism. And yet I never felt at home. I was kind of double dating for like a year. And so when I would come back from visiting the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace up in Seattle, my face would hurt from laughing. My stomach would hurt from good food and laughing and I don't know what. And I just, even though the ages were the same, because there's the reality of the demographic reality in religious life, I felt like I was with my people.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just knew.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's something about the fit, right? And the ease and being relaxed and able to be yourself.
Not that they don't drive me crazy from time to time.
Yeah.
And I don't drive them crazy because, that happens because we're people and it's not a perfect utopia by any means.
Right.
But I think there's joy and meaning and purpose.
What you're saying there reminds me of how when I worked at a spirituality center, we read some article that narrowed in on this idea that what people are seeking everywhere they are, no matter what type of spiritual seeker, is belonging, meaning, and purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so that really influenced the way that I then put retreats together and wanted to make sure that all those things were always offered to every person. And why I've become so incredibly passionate about building community too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk a bit more about Catholic social teaching. You mentioned the common good earlier.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define the common good? And how do you know when something is of the common good?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I think we go to the gospel. It goes back earlier than that, but as Christians, we can always start with the gospel. What is good for the least of these is good for the greatest of these too. Just so, like, for example, this is a practical application of it. In our congregation and in many congregations, as I said, we have older sisters. And so we have these incredible lay people that help us take care of our older sisters. And they're in positions that are societally low wage jobs. So certified nursing assistants, housekeepers, all those things. And so as a congregation that claims service of the common good and Catholic social teaching, when we look to our structures of pay, we look to Catholic social teaching. And so when we were putting together our compensation scale, we not only started with a living wage for the minimum wage, which is hard to define, but a definition of a living wage. We intentionally have our lower wage workers making more money than market, whereas our higher wage workers are at market. And that's a preferential option for the poor. So in Catholic social teaching, one of the tenets is a preferential option for the poor. And why would we be paying people wages to be poor when they're serving and working for us? Right. So common good does not mean that everyone gets the same thing. It means that everyone gets what they need to have a full life. I think rather than the societal viewpoint really is you get what you deserve, or you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or the rich have the whole idea of a prosperity gospel. That is counteracted by Catholic social teachings. Catholic social teaching starts with the human dignity of everyone. And therefore the common good and the goods of the political economy, if you will, is there to serve the people, not the people to serve the economy. So that's one way to think about it. You could spend your whole life studying Catholic social teaching. I was lucky enough to go to Catholic Theological Union, get my degree in ethics. One role I have now is I'm a formator with our candidates that are considering religious life. And last week I had our formation session on Catholic social teaching.
I'm chuckling because it's the fourth job you've mentioned now. You realize
I have a lot of jobs. I know. I know. So I was able to have a conversation with them about Catholic social teaching. And these are both women in their late 20s who are engaged and active and drawn to our charism. And they don't even really know necessarily about Catholic social teaching. It gives such a practical approach, whether it's, how to vote, whether it's how to shop, whether, there's so many ways. that our church has been just navigating how we live life with each other. It's a great resource. But yes, I do have a lot of jobs.
Is that life-giving for you?
It is. And I think it's kind of like, we're at a moment in religious life and congregations like ours where something new is emerging. Yeah. And so if you think back to the founding of our congregations, the same 5 people did everything. So I think we're kind of back in that space. Anything I can do to serve the present and future of my charism, I want to do. Not doing that alone and doing that with others is fun.
And yet there's complexities, right? I mean, let's get into the messiness now, shall we?
Sure. Super messy.
Like, what are you learning about the messiness of religious life being in flux, of being a public church woman, of advocating for peace and justice, of using your power for good, for the common good? What are you discovering about how the gospel is an invitation to messiness?
First of all, I often think back to the sign that was in my friend Susie's house. I used to babysit my goddaughter, who's now in college because they grow up fast. And what it really says is there is no place where God is not. But the way the letters are written, I always read it as there is no place where goo is not. So things are gooey and God is in the goo. And thank God, God is in the goo. Yeah. I just want to say that. So I've been thinking a lot about chaos. This is really a chaotic time. And I actually led a retreat for a group of women in January.
Okay, job number 5, retreat leader.
It was one day. Anyway, I kind of fold that into my writer thing. But the theme was embracing chaos. Yeah. And really inviting them, these are lay women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, but it applies to us in religious life too. We're in a change of era. We're in this time of chaos. Just look at the political stuff that's happening right now. Look at the violence in the world. Look at even just people's family structures. It's a chaotic time. And we can see chaos as something to avoid, but good luck. You're not going to be able to. And I really have been reflecting a lot on, there's a spiritual writer from England. Her name is Margaret Silf. And she wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Other Side of Chaos. And when I read it 10 years ago on retreat, I was thinking of the other side, like we'll get through the chaos and then everything will be fine, right? Reading it again recently during all of this time in religious life and in the world, I realized that that's not her point. Her point is that the universe came out of chaos. God created us out of chaos. It's a creative moment. That's where God is. That's where options and ideas can foam forth. So I'm really encouraging myself and others to embrace the chaos, to take care of ourselves, to take care of each other, but also to not be afraid of it and to try things, because every system collapses and new systems come forward. And that's just the way life goes. Yeah. And there's a lot of research coming out now about something called uncertainty tolerance. And they've looked at, from the secular side, looking at the pandemic. And people who have a low tolerance for uncertainty were more likely to have unhealthy coping mechanisms. Whereas those who have a higher tolerance for uncertainty can thrive in these kind of situations. And so my kind of invitation to myself and to the listeners is, where are those opportunities where we can lean into the uncertainty and look for that creativity there? Also, again, self-care, important, not to like just go chaotic all the time. Right. But that's where the new stuff's going to come. So like, when we just talk about religious life, when my elder sisters entered in the 50s or 60s, they thought they knew what they were going to have. And then it all blew up. The only difference is that we know we have no idea. That's the only difference.
We vowed and we said yes to the uncertainty and the chaos when we committed to this life. We knew that was part of the deal. And we knew that grief and loss and transformation, I mean, it is the situation for everyone who's living the spiritual life, for everyone who's living, like, really embracing living the gospel and like totally letting God have control, right? And trying to
Yeah.
surrender to that. I mean, what you're talking about reminds me of the book is called Into the Silent Land by Martin Laird, the Augustinian. And he writes about like when you're doing meditation, right? So he's connecting it to the spiritual practice of how you'll feel your emotions bubble up and you'll have all these
Right.
thoughts and so on and so forth. And whatever you're feeling and thinking, that's not who you are, but rather think of yourself like more like a mountain, and those are storms that are swirling around you. And I find that image really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think, actually normalizing for me that chaos and disorder and growth and transformation is just part of what it means to be human. And yes, it's like maybe amped up a little bit right now,
Mm-hmm.
but perhaps our consciousness is actually what's amped up.
Not only our consciousness, but if you look at like integral human consciousness and that whole study, like we have never had a greater impact on the world today than in the past. We've never had this level of impact. So we have had as big of an impact to mess everything up, look at climate crisis, but we've never had as big of an impact to shift our consciousness into these higher levels of connection and possibility, you know?
Yeah.
So like even looking at the experience of the younger generations of religious life and the grief. It's one of my first friends in community just died. She was
Same.
95,
Yeah.
95 years old. It was the first time that I got condolence notes and phone calls from my sisters because they knew how close I was to her.
Same. Same.
Right. And so that was really, really hard. Now, the other side of that grief is she knew me. I knew her. We could yell at each other. We could laugh. We had fun. I was loved. That is an amazing gift. And then also, I kind of wonder, because we have a large concentration of this, of these women that we know and love as peers, even though they're 40 years older than us,
Yeah.
or 50 years older than us, or 20 or however many. I kind of have wondered, I think that God is doing something with our generation of sisters that's for the church and the world, that we're kind of having this practice of love and grief, that we have this experience of anticipatory grief and still holding on to hope.
Yeah.
Because if you think about all of the loss and pain and suffering in Gaza or in Ukraine or in Sudan or wherever in the world right now, or on the streets, I'm here in Jersey City right now while I'm talking to you, and who knows what has happened on the streets of Jersey City today or in New York, that we have this communal experience in faith of navigating this. What then is our responsibility to witness and to accompany people through that in their lives? You know, so there's some mission piece there that we haven't found yet, I think. Not that things happen for a reason, because that's not my theology, but we can learn from everything that happens.
Yes.
And God is in the mess with us.
Amen. And isn't it true that while we're forming, we're being formed?
Oh, yeah.
You know?
For sure.
So, I mean, and that's something I'm trying to always be conscious of, is like, not so that I get overwhelmed by the intensity of it, but actually the choices I make today that are very just feel very mundane and ordinary are impactful on tomorrow and next year. To embrace a level of intentionality of like, everything actually does have meaning and purpose, because every choice we make does matter, and it is creating who we become. Yeah. My mind's actually going to like the like the way we even choose to recreate matters, right? And like what sort of media are we consuming? Like how are we choosing, who are we choosing to hang out with? Where are we choosing to go? Where are we choosing to spend time? I kind of get back when I was a teen and I was hanging out with more Protestants than Catholics, and there was like this like, make sure your CD collection is all very good and holy and pure music, right? Like there is a kernel of wisdom in that. I don't want to become rigid about my desire to choose what's good and holy and life-giving. On the other hand, to be conscious that all that is impactful on my spirit, myself, and who I'm becoming as a person.
And to be discerning.
Right.
I mean, part of, I think, why, think back to the politics, why we're in such the mess we're in is people are only choosing what they think is good or holy and not getting exposed to other viewpoints and opinions. Right. So I think it is important to have some diversity of that, but also to be discerning about it and to know that It's not black and white.
Yeah.
And the danger is to think you can create a black and white world when actually we're in this soup of chaos.
Amen. It's so true. So, Sister Susan, what is discipleship for you?
Discipleship is a journey. There's so many stories in the Gospels of Jesus, either poor man in the Gospel of Mark, just going across that boat, like across the lake, like every single day. He's practically going across that lake. Or, I think of the disciples on the road to Emmaus and Jesus being there with them. It's a movement. It's not being stuck, but it's constantly answering the call to where Jesus is pointing, which is to the good that God created. Everything is good. And taking those 2 feet of charity and justice and walking in faith, who knows where, hopefully, following Jesus. This last year on my retreat, I was really surprised by the gift of realizing how much I like to pray. You think as a Catholic sister, like that's a no-brainer.
Right.
But you're a sister of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration. Adoration has never been a large spiritual practice for me, but on retreat this last year, it was. Surprisingly, I spent a lot of time in adoration. And that's kind of stationary. That's not moving. But I felt the heart moving. In discipleship, always being open to that movement into the heart of God and where that leads us with people.
Amen. Thank you so much, Susan. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your creative work, your mission, your ministries, and how the listeners could support you in your congregation?
Well, one way to support the gospel would be to make sure you're registered to vote and that everyone you know is registered to vote.
Yeah.
And that you pray about how you vote. That is one thing, I think, for sure, especially during this election year. No matter what your politics are, as long as they're informed by your faith and your wisdom and discernment, then that is a good thing. Pray for vocations to all calls, marriage and single life and religious life, because this is, for those who are called to it, an amazing way of being about building the kingdom, and it's fun. And so don't be afraid to ask the question of people who you think might have a religious vocation.
Amen. Thank you.
And we're fun,
Yeah, we are. We're not as boring as people might think.
Oh, you've never been to a dance party until you've been to a nun dance party.
That's right, world. Oh, thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Julia. This has been great.
Yeah. Messy Jesus Business is produced and edited by Colin Wamskans. You can find us online at messyjesusbusiness.com and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. If you like what you heard, please be sure to mention our podcast to your friends and followers. And we'd love to have your support via Patreon. From the bottom of our hearts and the middle of the mess, thank you. Messy Jesus Business is produced in partnership with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. You can learn more about our religious community and donate to our mission at www.fspa.org. I'm Sister Julia Walsh, and I'll catch up with you next time. Until then, peace and all good.